All right, we might actually wrap things up today. We'll see where we get, and we'll talk about that at the end. But we were talking about children and nourishing them, and we're going to talk a little bit about older adults. And then topic 15 is a little bit of a Pandora's box about talking about world hunger. I'm going to touch on a couple of things, and it's going to be very short. So realize we finished off talking about allergies, and always trying to remember what I said last day. Can't always remember what I was talking about, but there was some information that I saw was not included in the slides, and that was what are the most at-risk foods for people having anaphylactic shock. Probably most people know a little bit about peanuts and tree nuts and fish or shellfish. Those tend to be the common ones that people talk about a lot, but the list is a little bit longer. It also includes eggs and milk, sesame seeds, and there are other things. Those are not the only possibilities, right? There are some people that have soy allergies that are very serious, but in terms of kind of, the top few, that's the list. The peanuts, tree nuts, fish, shellfish, two different categories, right? Shellfish would include things like crabs and oysters, right? Things like that. Just for anyone who doesn't know, a peanut is not a nut, it's a legume, right? So that's why on the warning labels, it will say may contain peanuts and tree nuts, or it may be something that's peanut free, but may contain tree nuts, or the other way around. So just so you know, and again, this is something I know very well because I have a son with a peanut allergy, right? And so they're very, very different. And all of these allergies are very, depending on how you get tested or whatnot. My nephew had a pistachio allergy, and apparently it's the same allergen that's found in mangoes. So, these kind of things happen, right? And so he avoids pistachios and mangoes, I guess. And the other thing I can't remember if I made clear or not was if you're having that anaphylactic shock, right, that usually means you're having trouble breathing. Pretty much the only thing we know what to do is give the person adrenaline. And that's why the EpiPens are life-saving, because without it, the person may stop breathing. My son had a couple of exposures over the years. In both cases, we did not have to give him an EpiPen. And so that was all right, but he carries one around just in case. And that's the other thing to say about anaphylactic shock. There's lots of interesting allergy studies, and anyone with allergies knows this. It could be allergy season, and one day you're just awful, and the next day you're just fine. And we don't really understand that about the immune system. Why is it that you have a peanut allergy, and one day you eat some peanuts, and you barely have a reaction, and the next day you almost die from it? We don't have an answer to that. There's many mysteries about the immune system. It's very, very fascinating to learn about the immune system. Let's see your comment here. Someone says they're surprised bananas are not on the list. Yeah, so you know what? That's a new one to me. I've never heard about a banana allergy, but then again, there's lots of weird ones out there. I had a neighbor with a carrot allergy, right? I laughed at him. Well, who has a carrot allergy? What's wrong with you? Anyway, it was all in joke. And it turned out in this case, he actually worked at a carrot factory, right? So this is where he probably got the allergy from. He's exposed to it, probably got it subdermally, right? That's one way people get allergies, when you're not necessarily eating it, but getting exposed through nicks and scratches on the skin. That's a way to get sensitized to something. So these things happen, right? Like I said, soy, there was a girl in my son's class who was deathly allergic to peas, like green peas. So one of the substitutes that many kids bring to school nowadays is pea butter, right? I don't know if anyone's heard of that. It's kind of like a spread substitute that's not made out of peanuts, and we couldn't send that either. So there's lots of interesting allergies out there. You name it. People seem to have the ability to get allergic to anything, whether they like it or not. Yeah, kid allergic to grape flavoring. No one believed him. Yeah, I mean, some of these things I've never heard before, but these are the common ones. You see these ones on all the lists. Like I said, some of the lists I've seen include soy and mustard, and once in a while you see other things on the list, but every list I've ever seen usually has these ones every time. So I don't know what that is, 7 or 8 foods there. And some of them include the shellfish, and they call seafoods, which includes all fish, but of course, not all fish are in the sea. I don't know how you classify them, but anyway, that's the list. So I think we had finished off last day roughly on this slide here, and I mentioned the adrenaline is the way to open up the airways, and it's temporary, lasts about 15-ish minutes. So if you are a parent or if you're someone allergic and you're further than, let's say, 15 minutes away from an emergency, then sometimes it's a good idea to have 2 EpiPens, right? Anyway, just something to think about. Usually what they do at the emergency is they give you the antihistamines, and that tames the immune system down a little bit. Problem is it can take 20 minutes before they really start taking effect. The classic antihistamine is Benadryl. They're not recommending Benadryl anymore. Benadryl is like a first generation antihistamine with so many side effects like drowsiness and other things. There's much better ones, but they still sell it because it's a bestseller, right? But there's lots of them you can get, and that's another thing we send to school with my son. Is he's got these little, not the liquid form, but some sort of antihistamine tablets that are chewable. And if there's ever an incident, which he hasn't had in years, he can munch on them, I guess is what you do to calm down the system. There's lots of it could be said about kids and foods. Here's another one that comes up all the time is hyperactivity. There's decades worth of studies on these kind of things, and they don't really find a connection. There's a few studies that have found connections. One of the famous ones is the whole thing, and a lot of people have in their head, for example, around hyperactivity and one of the red food colorings. My sister, I remember, would tell us not to give her son the red popsicles. Don't give him the red popsicles, because she was convinced. But if you ever met my nephew, I mean, the kid was like super energetic. It was just in his DNA, right? And his personality too, right? And of course, my sister's personality at the time was kind of the opposite. She liked everything to be calm, and so she was doing everything she could to not have them hyperactive. And if you have kids, you probably know actually the days leading up to Halloween, they're more hyper than actually the day after. All the excitement. But anyway, it's something around these things like attention deficit and hyperactivity disorders. There's a lot of things we don't really fully understand, right, in terms of their onset and those kind of things. But it's probably not the food, although good nutrition is not going to hurt these kids either, right? I mean, no one's going to blame you for telling you to cut back your kids' sugar intake, right? That's not necessarily a bad thing. Just don't blame the sugar. You can see this other note here about there's a lot of connections between poor nutrition and sometimes behavioral disorders, kids being irritable or not focused or things like that. And I think I've got a slide here about breakfast programs, which is another kind of big one. There's a lot of connection between kids missing breakfast and school performance, right? And I think I got a whole slide about that, so we'll get to that in a moment. Lots of studies on screen time, which is of course the hugest concern, right, of parents nowadays. Kids are rotting their brains, so I'm having more and more screen time, and somehow kids have been able to fit in more screen time now in the last few years than ever before historically, probably because of mobile devices, right? And of course, the concern is this rotting our brains, doing us damage, those kind of things. And I mean, the studies show it kind of depends on what you're doing, right? If you're on your screen time and you're doing crossword puzzles, that's probably giving you some mental exercise. If you're on there, you're doing this or that. I mean, it's like anything in life. But the biggest concern, of course, is that, with television or video games, is that it really is encouraging sedentary behavior. And a lot of people have associations with eating salty or high sugar foods or soft drinks or whatever with these kind of activities, right? And why not, right? I mean, people like to sit down with a movie and popcorn, or, some people it's much more calorie dense foods and things like that. So that's really where the concern is, rather than about what people are actually doing on the screens and those kind of things. I mean, we could talk about, there is a correlation of, believe it or not, teenagers are getting more neck injuries now with mobile devices. And you can imagine, just picture your typical teenager like this, right? Your head is a heavy thing, right? And your neck muscles are not designed to be like this all day long. And so there's certain types of neck injuries we're seeing more common. But that's the kind of thing, right? Is who's sitting there watching the movie with a plate of vegetables? Not too many people, right? But that's not a bad thing to kind of think about. People like, we're watching a movie, let's have a snack, right? Thinking about healthy alternatives. And you start getting in that habit, it's not too bad. I think I've confessed several times here that ice cream, is my big weakness, and probably at least a decade of my life, right? That was my evening. 9 o'clock rolls around, and that ice cream craving comes along, and you see what's on the TV, and it was just like, there you go, right? And so trying to retrain myself to look for healthy alternatives, right, in the evening. So, lately I've been into pickles, for example, right, which are high in salt, but probably a lot better than the ice cream for me. At least it's a start anyway. But anyway, something to think about. A big one, and I think we've kind of hinted on this here and there, right, is just habits. And of course, kids pick up on family habits, right, in terms of those kind of things. So around television watching, all those kind of things, what the habits are around meals. If dad is coming in after work and grabbing, a beer and sitting down on the couch before dinner, it's not going to be surprising when that child is an adult that he's doing the same thing, right? And then does it become 1 or 2 or 3 beers or whatnot, and then the beer belly follows, right? As opposed to coming in and maybe snacking on some vegetables or something like that. All these kind of things, come with having kids, showing them and modeling good behavior, right? And that goes for many aspects of life and nutritious behavior. There's lots of suggestions about kids, learning, getting them to help you prepare meals. I mean, these are good life skills, and some of them are certainly more interested in that kind of thing than others. But all of these kind of things, these good habits are, you're training your child to hopefully someday become a healthy adult themselves, right? And so it's good for us to be good role models. And there's like I said, tons of suggestions and tips like this. And it's always good as a parent to at least once in a while pick up a parenting magazine or read something about those kind of things to get these tips, right? And improve yourself and improve your child's life as well, hopefully. Like I said, you can see lots of tips here about, there's lots of opinions on how you should use food to reward or punish behavior. There's a lot of dangers in those areas. Particularly where people are using sweets to encourage certain types of behaviors or not. And logically it makes sense. Yeah, why not? Let's not give our kid a donut for doing this or that, right? But then you try having kids, right? You get to the stage where it's like, okay, we're trying to teach this kid to potty train, for example. You got to find something, right? And but anyway, like I said, these are all things sort of, aspirations to work for. But let me just say this. Nobody's perfect, and when you're a parent, you won't be perfect either. So there's the good luck part, right? Anything else here? Yeah, so some lifestyle choices to help the overweight child. It's not necessarily, this is a concern with parents that have overweight children or children who are at risk of obesity. You shouldn't be trying to get a 10-year-old on some sort of crazy strict diet necessarily, right? They have a growing body. 10-year-old is somebody who is maybe prepubescent. You don't want to deprive them of valuable nutrients. But what you want to do is maybe push them towards just a healthier diet, right? The nutrient-dense foods, get them away from, let's say, the higher fat, less nutrient-dense foods and those kind of things. And encouraging physical behavior and those kind of things. A lot of children who look like they are going to be obese, when they hit that growth spurt in teenage years, sometimes they stretch up and not out. And some of them can become quite slender, but it's about getting those good habits, because some of them will eventually become adults. And if those habits aren't good, they do fill out, and sometimes in the wrong ways. And so again, it's all about encouraging good habits, right? And if you're concerned, always, get help as well, right? One of the other risks to children, and this is a big one, is dental issues. Probably 1,000 reasons why, but it's all those other people giving your kids candy, not your fault, right? Everyone's giving your kids candy. Seems to be the case in my family. People always trying to give your kids candy. They don't even ask you, they're just giving your kids candy. Boy, it drives me nuts. But anyway, right, sugar on the teeth, right? I think we talked about this before. There are bacteria on your teeth that will break down that sugar and make acids, right? So, there's strategies around this. Obviously, good dental hygiene, such as brushing, 2 to 3 times a day is kind of the recommendation. I think all the dentists are trying to get us to 3, but they'll be happy with 2. Flossing, those kind of things. That's all in itself. But, you know, other little habits like if the child is having a soft drink, right? That's a really high acidic beverage. And so getting them to maybe have a drink of water afterwards, just a small drink where they're rinsing can actually do a pretty big difference. You can see there's some other suggestions up there, right? You know, if you know they're not going to brush their teeth soon, then maybe like even foods like raisins and whatnot. Raisins, by the way, are great. They're high iron, you know, those kind of things. They've got good fiber in them, but you know, they tend to stick on the teeth and they can, what'd you say?
I said they don't taste great.
Well, you know, again, it depends on whether you like them or not, right? That's the big one, right, in families, right? That, you know, you've got the raisin lovers and the raisin haters. You know, I mean, raisins are one reason why some people have trust issues around cookies. You know, I mean, why would you ever put a raisin in a cookie? That's my personal belief. I don't mind the little boxes them once in a while, but putting them in a cookie, you know, I know some people are like, oh, I can't believe you just said that.
I'd rather them in a cookie than in carrot cake.
How many times have I grabbed a cookie? Someone offered me a cookie and I thought it was chocolate chip and it's not. Yeah, anyway. But you can see there's some tips there, right? And some kids are at higher risk than others, just around little habits in terms of what they're doing. And certain kinds of candies, right? You know, suckers and things like that that are just leaving the sugar on the teeth forever. You know, kids should not be having these things all the time, is my opinion. But anyway, it's around, like I said, that dental health, thinking about those kind of things. But teaching good habits as well. So breakfast is one of these things that would be great to go into a huge amount of detail on, but I'm just going to say a little bit about this. There's lots of breakfast programs out there that people may have heard of. A lot of schools now have snacks for kids when they arrive, just in case they need something. I know, for example, McTavish, I think we've donated boxes of granola bars there. And they take them and they have them available for kids. There's a lot of kids, particularly when they become teenagers, they suddenly don't want to eat breakfast anymore. And there's tons and tons of studies around breakfast being important, because a lot of kids who don't have breakfast, they have issues with focusing. And of course, that leads to all sorts of other things, which includes behavioral issues, sometimes lower performance in school, all those kind of things, right? And generally, you know, a lot of people think, okay, well, they'll just make up for it at lunchtime. And the truth is, a lot of these kids do not, or they eat lunch, but their lunch is not necessarily that healthy. You know, because by the time lunch arrives, they're hungry, and then they're just, you know, buying chocolate bars or whatever else at the school cafeteria or across the street or whatever it is. I guess you're not allowed to sell them schools anymore. But I certainly remember that case when I went to high school, how many kids at lunchtime, their lunch was a bag of chips and a chocolate bar, right? And you're just like, wow, yeah, good luck there with growing up and being healthy. But like I said, lots and lots of studies on these things, which is why, like, so many countries have breakfast programs that have been nationalized. Canada does not, for some reason. According to the textbook, we're the only developed country in the world that has no program or policy around breakfast. You see that usually a lot of communities have these breakfast programs targeted towards certain schools. There's always schools in communities that are associated with lower income individuals and whatnot. And that's usually where the breakfast programs are always focused first before they roll out to the other schools. Like I said, McTavish doesn't necessarily have a breakfast program, but they have snacks. And that's at least a start, right? Like I said, you can take a look at this, and there's tons of really interesting studies done on these kind of things, looking at when breakfast programs start and the effects it has on the kids in terms of school performance and those kind of things. And they're really, really fascinating. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, some of the schools, like the high schools, they've like taken their food program, or like they offer like a breakfast club type thing, and they actually make the breakfast for everybody in the house. So then,
Yeah, and that's what I remember back when I was in Ontario. The one school, they were just starting that, and every kid could have this breakfast, and they were making like porridge and everything, right? And you know, you just had to show up at 8:30, and it was for every kid, right? And this was definitely a neighborhood that was targeted towards lower income families, right? And they were talking about, before I left Ontario, rolling this out to the other schools because it was such a successful thing, right? And it was just, I think, the matter of getting the funding or the volunteers or whatever they needed. Yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit about teens. Lots could be said about teens. Many things could be said about teens. But they're growing, going through a lot of changes, and huge variety of changes, right, in terms of all sorts of things, right, in terms of mental, physical, those kind of things are changing, right? A lot of them tend to start adopting bad nutrition habits. You know, they're more independent now. They're packing their own lunch, let's say, or you know, all those kind of things contribute to it, or you know, suddenly they have a little bit of their own income, they have a job or an allowance or whatever, and so they're choosing to spend that on all sorts of things, right? So generally, I think I mentioned this last day, one of the trends that's the biggest concern is teens not drinking milk products anymore. So they're losing out on calcium, and they're replacing with soft drinks, right? So that's one of the big things I see in all the studies where they talk about that a lot. Not necessarily they're removing milk, but more they're replacing a lot of their calories or other things with soft drinks. Soft drinks are high calories, high sugar, and if you're replacing other good nutrients, then that's obviously a concern. What else is on here? So this is talking about you know, other negative things. So alcohol, tobacco, those kind of things are always a concern that are something that is going to increase in the general population when people become teenagers. And like I said, a lot of it has to do with just that change in life where people are becoming more independent, more access to things, maybe less parental supervision. You know, when your child is 3, right, you have a pretty good control over their life in a lot of ways. You know, you're giving them everything they eat. You know, you're there controlling it. You know, they can't reach anything in the fridge or the cupboard. So you're doing that. And as they get older, teenagers is where, you know, like I said, that usually a lot more independence and those kind of things. I think I had some notes here about energy levels and things like that. You know, here's some charts from the textbook looking at, you know, soft drink consumption and those kind of things, and milk and other consumption. And you'll hear this kind of thing, complaints from parent after parent after parent about these kind of things. My sister-in-law married a man who was divorced and had 2 teenagers. And, you know, she's like, I can't believe these guys. They have a pop fridge, right? And these kids are just constantly going to this pop fridge, and she's not their mom. And she's like, I'm not going to say anything to them. I mean, but like, this is nuts. This can't be good for their health. And so, like I said, you see things like this all the time, right? It's a big concern. And like I said, the biggest concerns are the amount of calories, empty calories, which can contribute to obesity, which contributes to all sorts of, you know, other things. And of course, the replacement of all the good nutrients, calcium being a big one for people who are growing, and they can use that for their bones, of course. Thought I had some other comments about here. Another one is iron. I think I've mentioned this before. Iron seems to come up again and again and again, being important for different growth stages. Girls begin menstruating, iron demand is higher. Boys are usually building some muscle mass, whether they're working out or not. You know, once they hit puberty, there's more testosterone in the system, and they end up getting a little more muscular. And of course, all that requires iron. I think I mentioned last day, not recommended to have iron supplements for children. That includes teenagers unless prescribed, because of course, iron toxicity is an issue. But it is something that can be a concern. And of course, you know, lots of teens do change their dietary habits for all sorts of reasons. I've known at least a few teens that have decided, you know, at one point they were interested in becoming vegetarian, for example, right? And so again, there's a source of iron that they'd be lacking from their body by not having meat products. And that's something you can't just, you got to sort of transition into slowly, and as you figure it out, to make sure you are getting balanced, not just protein, but also appropriate amount of iron. So I think we talked a little bit about iron deficiencies before, right? You know, fatigue, sometimes lack of focus. Those are some early warnings. You know, if people have extreme anemia, it can be a lot worse. So like I said, body changes and those kind of things, the energy demands on teenagers are hugely varied. Some teenagers are very active. They're in like 3 sports, plus dancing, plus whatever, right? You know, those kind of things. And others do the exact opposite. They were into sports, and then suddenly at 13, they quit everything and become completely sedentary, right? So you're looking at, calorie demands ranging from maybe 1,600 calories to 3,500 calories, right? For teenagers. I can tell you when I was competitively swimming in high school, I was eating at least 6 meals a day for about 2 years of my life, and I couldn't get enough food. I remember literally bringing 2 lunches to school, right? And people trying to get me to share my food with them. And I'm like, no, man, I need that, right? That was the case, right? But so for context, like when I was 15, I was swimming about 8,000 meters a day, which is, let's see here, that's about, 3.5 hours of swimming, right? And, I'm not thinking anything of it, right? But now I certainly don't do that. If I ate like that, I'd be in serious trouble, and those kind of things. You can see it mentions here about weight standards, right? So BMI and things like that. These things, there are some BMI kind of indexes for teenagers and children and whatnot. They all have to be used with kind of a grain of salt because they're not as accurate predictors as they are for a full-grown adult and those kind of things. Generally, and this goes with most kids, everyone is different, right? Some have massive growth spurts, some do not. I know the textbook talks about kids should have relatively smooth progress in terms of growth and all those kind of things. And I think that's honestly, from what I've read in other sources, that's a load of garbage. Everyone is very different, right? Some kids, they're stuck, right? They're stuck. All their friends are growing, and then suddenly they shoot up 6 inches in 6 months. And that's actually relatively normal. Just having that good nutrition for them is key, so that when they do grow, they have iron reserves and calcium reserves and those kind of things, so that their body can handle it. I think I mentioned this already about energy needs can vary hugely, right? And also, all these things, of course, just depend on the body size too, right? And those kind of things. That's the other thing to keep in mind with children, right? Pediatricians and all those kind of things, they have these charts, and it's gonna be different, right? Some kids are just small, right? Whether it's genetic reasons or whatnot, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're at risk for other things, right? They can be healthy and small, healthy and big. There's huge differences in everybody, and those kind of things. Always take it with a grain of salt, right? As they say. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the later years. So lots of good news, maybe, in that we seem to be living a little longer. I found this article from CTV based on a study talking about, your life expectancy. So a little bit more if you're a female versus a male. But you're looking at, 80 plus years is your typical life expectancy nowadays for Canadians. And that's on the increase. You can see that chart there on the left showing that the life expectancy of Canadians has been gradually increasing for quite some time now. And a lot of that has to do with health, and better medicine, better understanding of things, better practices, right? If you look at for example, cigarette smoking has gone down for decades, right? That's the number one thing people can do to affect their health is take that habit out of their life. But, some of it's genetics as well. Lots of changes happen to you as you age, and we're not talking about just old age, but, and you probably know, I'm assuming most of you are, either almost 20 or in your 20s. And you probably know that there's some big differences in your body from when you're 19, from even 16, right? And those changes continue to happen from when you get 30 and 40 and so on. And much of it is gradual, and they include all sorts of things, right? Things like, gaining or losing muscle mass, changes in hormonal activities, those kind of things. And, the reality is that habits that you have in life can have cumulative decade-long effects, right? So physical activity is one of the one that might be kind of obvious. You can spend years neglecting it, or you can spend years exercising, for example, and that can lead to effects or not. As you get older, obviously your body composition changes. Sometimes people have injuries, you don't heal as fast. Lots and lots of those kind of things to look forward to. And as I mentioned, I'm in my 40s and learning about some of these things myself, things like getting injuries and finding out that wow, when I was 30, that would have been fine like the next day. Now it's like hurting me for 2 weeks. Why is my knee sore? And those kind of things, right? And as you get older and older, these things are even more and more so. And you can compound all sorts of other complications on there. Sometimes people have heart problems or arthritis or all of those kind of things that can affect your handling of those things, and mental things as well, right? In terms of your perception, in terms of how you want to deal with these kind of things, right? When people are younger, they tend to be a little bit more proactive in dealing with injuries or whatnot. As people get older, they may get more hesitant or disillusioned with the medical system, or there's all sorts of things that can go on there. But there's some changes you can look forward to, and lots of things to learn about as you go along. But you don't need to be scared of them, right? It's you're aging because you're human. That's not a bad thing. Needs change, and this is the other interesting thing I'll say about and I recommend everybody do this. When you turn 40, have a big birthday party. I did this and invited a whole bunch of people. And the awesome thing was people showed up and everyone started talking about their age, right? And like, you have no idea how old your friends are. And it's very, very fascinating because you have no idea. There was one guy I found out was 2 years younger than me, and I thought he was 50, right? People age at different rates, right? Some people are older than me, and I didn't know how old, but some of them seem a lot younger, a lot older, and it's very, very fascinating to kind of learn the kind of thing around 40 anyway. So I'm going to do it again when I'm 50 for sure. But this is the kind of thing, right? There's things you can do about that, and there's some things that you can't control, right? And that's kind of a big part of aging, right? And so we want to hopefully do better in the things that we can't control. Generally, as you get older, your energy needs decrease, your metabolism slows down. Many people do slow down just kind of physically, right? In terms of exercising, maybe you're still jogging, but you're not jogging at the same intensity, those kind of things. It is very easy, and again, this is from my personal experience, to migrate towards a sedentary lifestyle. When I was in my 20s, I couldn't sit still, right? It was tough. Going through university was pretty tough for me in some ways, right? To ask, do you sit still for an hour? That was really tough when I was young. I just wanted to do things all the time. Now, I don't know what happened, but somewhere now I can sit in my office for 3 hours and I realize I've gotten up for 3 hours. I'm like, what has happened to me, right? It happens, right? You can see the ideal BMI is a little bit higher than what you'd see for younger people. As we mentioned, the BMI is kind of your typical young adult is what those ideal numbers are for, right? So 25 was considered, was it 25 or 27? I can't remember now. Being considered, that's the point where you start becoming a little overweight. You can see for an older individual, a BMI of 27 is actually considered a bit more normal. So not a bad thing. Physical activity is good for older people, but sometimes it has to be modified. Obviously, there's more concerns about injury and healing and those kind of things. Women who are postmenopausal, concerns about bones and those kind of things. So probably shouldn't be skydiving or something like that, but I'm sure it happens. Again, there's lots of interesting things that people do, but just, the risk is certainly a little bit higher. I think we mentioned before about resistance training. So it's important for people, around 40 is when it starts to get harder to build muscle mass. Your body wants to, the default is to break it down slowly. And if you don't do any resistance training, I can't remember what the number is, you lose 1 or 2% of your muscle mass per year if you're not doing any training or anything like that. So you can imagine, at first that's not much, but then, you reach 65 and suddenly you're not what you once were, unless you're doing some exercise and things like that. I think I've got a little slide here talking about, some of the benefits of physical activity, and they're all the things that we talked about before, right? Overall better health. But there's a huge mental aspect that's been connected with physical activity and elderly people. One of the big things that is kind of in the news a lot, but one of the big things that's starting to talk about a lot is older adults and mental illness and dementia, right? And there's a stat, and I can't remember what year. I think it's when you're 65, you have a certain percentage of getting of having dementia, and it's something like 20%, right? It's pretty high if I remember correctly. And then every year after that, or sorry, every 5 years after that, it doubles. Right? So by the time you're 100, you've got like, I don't know, an 80% chance of having some form of dementia or pre-dementia, right? And so some of these things can actually be offset or at least slowed down by physical activity. And there's a lot of interesting studies. We don't really fully understand what's going on, but probably has a lot to do with overall better body health and those kind of things, right? So you can see there's a bunch of things there, to point out, and little things like better sense of balance. Right? Doesn't seem like a big deal when you're young, but when you're older and dealing with those kind of things, I remember my mother in some years, having issues with that exact kind of thing, right? And so, obviously these kind of things, it's good to be physically active when you're older. Although, like I said, you may change your activities, but moving around is certainly always good. Anything else on there to mention? Yeah, like I said, we could go on about that one for a while, but we've already talked about that a little bit already. Protein needs, about the same for older adults than younger adults. The kidneys are not as efficient as they once were, so there is the issue with eating too much protein for older people. Not usually a concern, but certainly some people's diets, that is a thing, right? So what about carbohydrates? Also good, but fiber. Older people, you may or may not know this, are generally more likely to suffer from constipation. And, trying to look into exactly why that is, there's probably a whole bunch of reasons to do with it. Some of it is just, lifestyle. When you're more sedentary, your digestive system doesn't get a chance to kind of move things around quite as well. A lot of older adults are dehydrated, so that's not going to help with constipation. All those kind of things they can accumulate into a body, right? And this is generally with all adults can suffer from constipation, not having enough fiber. But like I said, if you have years of doing that kind of thing, your body just gets into a habit of being constipated as well. And so, the whole thing about older people and fiber, not bad to start it now, making sure you have lots of fiber in your diet. And you can see there's lots of products targeted towards people who need the fiber. You can see all these cereals and oat bars and those kind of things. A lot of them are just disgusting products. Prunes and prune juice and those kind of things. Prunes are kind of like natural laxatives. Again, they've got nutrients in them as well, and fiber and those kind of things. And I think I mentioned the synthetic fiber. Well, I'm not sure what's in these things. These drinks you can get. They're little powders. And have different fibers and things like that. But that's kind of one of the big ones, right? Trying to get older people to have more fiber. Every doctor is asking their patients that and making recommendations if they're having issues, right? And we can get this from fruits and vegetables. So good nutrition as well. So what about fats? Again, it's the usual recommendation, right? Getting the good fats, those omega fats in there are good for the brain, and avoiding or at least cutting down on the saturated fats, which can lead to atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries and those kind of things. You can see there's some other notes about different types of arthritis, right? There's a bunch of different types of arthritis in terms of what is going on in the body. Rheumatoid arthritis, for example, is an autoimmune disorder, but all of these things can be exacerbated by being overweight, right? And so that goes along with dietary choices and those kind of things as well. What else do we have on here? So what about vitamins? Interestingly, vitamin A is not usually a concern. Elderly people, I guess, as you get older, you can absorb vitamin A better than when you're younger. So not usually a concern. Vitamin D is the big one. I think we talked about this before. I think I showed you this exact slide before, and you can see that in terms of the recommended amount of dietary vitamin D for most of us is 600 units a day. But as you hit 50s and 60s, your body is going to actually make less, right? And so you can see that for adults over 70, the recommendation is actually a little bit higher on there. And there's I've been seeing a lot of recommendations, in terms around vitamin D supplementation. I'm starting to see A lot of doctors are apparently recommending anyone over 50 takes at least 400 units a day, right? Is kind of the recommendation they're looking at, assuming you're getting the rest of it from your diet. So they're even starting to think around 50 might be a critical moment, but this is still the recommendations is over 70 is when it starts to get more crucial. But anyway, vitamin D, right, involved in bone health and strength. So again, another big important thing for older people to be concerned about, particularly women, postmenopausal, and worried about bone strength, right? Vitamin B12 apparently is another one that older people are more likely to be deficient on. So you're mostly getting that from animal products. And it's involved in a whole bunch of processes like all the B vitamins, but energy and blood, right, are kind of the big ones that are the concern. Don't really know a lot about this, but I've been reading that apparently there's, a lot of people that are undiagnosed with deficiencies, at least older people, in this particular vitamin. So anyway, there's some pictures for you on that one. What about water? Well, apparently, I keep reading about this. I don't know much about it, but apparently a lot of older people are more dehydrated than they should be. And this is totally related with constipation. You don't get enough water in your system. You're ending up with more solid feces, which is harder to push out, which is not fun, and can lead to things like hemorrhoids, right? And so, all the more reason to get that fiber in the diet and to make sure people are hydrated. Recommendations for older people is about the same amount of liquid, but like I said, it's likely they may be getting less. So look at someone like my dad. I don't think I ever saw him drink anything other than coffee, right? So, if that's your only source of water other than in your food, it probably wasn't good for him. I don't know. I never asked him how his constipation levels were, but that kind of thing. Iron, I guess we talked about this as well, right? Iron status apparently, I think it has something to do with absorption. It gets better as you get older, so not usually a big thing, but it does happen depending on the kind of diets, right? Of course, that's a big one there. Zinc deficiencies are apparently also common, something I don't know a ton about, but apparently a lot more common in elderly people. And you can see there's kind of the problem with the zinc deficiency is your appetite gets suppressed, and then that leads to further zinc deficiency, right? So I guess it has something to do with medications. Again, I don't know a lot about all of the medications people are using. There's many different types, but some medications apparently interact with zinc absorption and can cause that kind of thing, which leads to further malnutrition. And so I guess that's something that they're trying to look for. I don't know whether they recommend supplementation or not. Maybe talk to a doctor about that at some point, but that is another one on there. Calcium, as I mentioned, that's a big one for particularly postmenopausal women to make sure they're getting enough calcium. And the other thing that happens is that as people age, you are more likely to become lactose intolerant, right? And so, that's going to lead to possibly less calcium in the diet. And so, this is the kind of thing that, to watch out for and make sure people are having enough calcium, particularly women are the ones that are more likely to be deficient. And that has a lot to do with hormonal reasons postmenopausal. All right, what else can we say here? Yeah, this is just a summary of some of those nutrients we're talking about. Yeah, nothing on there I didn't talk about a little bit. Okay, so here's the question, right? What can we do? We want to, living longer is one thing, but you want to also be healthy in your retirement, right? So that's the kind of thing. And there's actually a really good famous study that was looking at the exact thing I was talking about. They're looking at people, I think, in their 70s and realizing that, some of these people look old and some of these people not so much. So what are the differences? There was this big study of like 7,000 people or something like that, and these massive surveys, and they interviewed them or whatever. And they came up with 6 things that they said seems to be affecting your physiological age, meaning, whether you look your age or you look younger or look older kind of thing, right? And these are some of the things that they highlighted, the 6 kind of big things, right? So moderation of alcohol use, nutritious meals, weight control, physical activity, absence from smoking, and what was the other one there? Sleep, right? So all of these things, go around hand in hand with things we've been talking about all semester. This is from the textbook, talking about things that you can change and things that you can't change, right? So some things are just genetic. If you're going to go bald, you're going to go bald in many cases for men, right? Graying of hair is highly genetic. If your parents went gray in their late 30s, good luck. It's probably you're going to do the same or around the same time. Some graying is related to stress, for sure, but most of it is genetic. Wrinkling of skin, a lot of skin issues are genetic. Going back to teenagers, right? I think the textbook had a blurb on acne, and there's a lot of myths around acne in terms of foods and those kind of things. Acne, unfortunately, like about 80% is genetics. A little bit to do with stress, maybe a tiny bit to do with diet, but the science is kind of inconclusive. And the biggest thing is, for most people, time. A lot of people will grow out of it, and sometimes it has to do with infections as well. But you can see lots of things there, right? Loss of vision, again, a lot of that is genetic, or it's just that's what your body does as it gets older. Your eyeballs become, they're not as liquidy as you get older, and so they don't flex as easily, so you can't focus. And so the whole stereotype about people, as you get older you squint more. It's true. I know I squint way more than I ever used to, because it's just harder to focus. So you can see lots of things on there that are just going to happen because you're not a spring chicken anymore, right? But there are some things that you can probably slow down or prevent due to good lifestyle and nutrition, physical activity, those kind of things. At least slow down, if not prevent them entirely. So you can see a lot of things we talked about, right? So blood pressure, bone loss, digestive problems, constipation, again, fiber is the big one in there, and a whole list of all sorts of things that you can do well by having good nutrition and having regular physical activity. Okay, what else do we have here? What about Alzheimer's disease? Wow, this is like a Pandora's box of like lots of crazy, interesting research. There's all sorts of little things and connections between this and that and Alzheimer's disease in terms of trying to prevent it or delay the onset and those kind of things. Probably for the most part, nutrition is not necessarily the answer. There might be some indications between those omega fats. Remember, the omega fats are found in the brain. Might be important. But again, we're not sure. Apparently, one of the biggest things you can do to delay onset of Alzheimer's is be bilingual. So most of us don't have a choice. It's something that happens when you're a child, right? They don't know whether if you learn another language as an adult, whether that makes a difference or not. But apparently that's a big indicator of at least delaying Alzheimer's. So there's lots of interesting studies like that, but probably nutrition is not a big one. Again, there's a bigger blurb on the textbook. You can read about it in the omega fats and all those kind of things, but the science is not totally clear about nutrition on there. In terms of nutrition in the elderly, there's this acronym in the textbook, and you can see there's a few things in there that I have not maybe touched on. You can see R, for example, reduce social contact. This is a thing, right? People get older and the kids move out or they move far away. They get less friends, and all, that can have a huge impact on your life, right? In terms of your physical activity. If you're lonely, maybe you suffer from mental health, which can, affect your nutrition and all sorts of different habits, right? You can see a bunch of things on there that are kind of, indicators of malnutrition that I guess, again, a nice acronym for healthcare providers to look at and kind of, see if there's any risk factors in there. What about drugs? Yes, right? Elderly people, meaning, I don't know if someone told me you're not supposed to use that word anymore. It's just to use older adults. I don't know. So I apologize if I offended anyone, but over 65, right? This is like a quarter of all our prescriptions out there of these people are taking them. And many are taking 1, 2, or 3 different things, right? And so this is something that has to be looked at in terms of, obviously the doctor and pharmacists are concerned about these kind of things. And if there's any interactions between the drugs, or sometimes the drugs and alcohol and those kind of things. But a lot of these things do affect nutrition, such as appetite, such as sometimes they affect uptake of certain nutrients and those kind of things. And all of these things, I think the textbook has a very comprehensive long list of these kind of things. There's no way I was going to go into all of them, but just things to, like I said, think about. There's a nice little slide here. You can see it's showing how some of the drugs may affect, those things I just talked about, nutrient uptake or even taste, or a whole variety of other things, right? And I think many of us have probably been in that case where you get sick for something and you take a drug, and yeah, sometimes it affects your stomach. You don't feel like eating anything, or it makes things taste a little weird, or whatever, right? And that can obviously affect your nutrition overall. Two things we could say a lot about. I actually had some other slides about caffeine that entirely vanished on me. I don't know what I did. I didn't save my file or something. Lots we could say about caffeine, but I'll say a couple of things. One, it's a stimulant. So no surprise the things it's going to do to you. It's going to make you more awake, more alert. It's going to increase your heart rate. It's going to increase your blood pressure. Not usually to a massive degree when you're eating it in food. Right? If you're having a coffee, most people are not chugging that entire cup down within seconds. And even if you are, it's probably taking time for it to get through into your body. So most people are not at risk, and even at higher doses, most adults do not have issues with caffeine. It may make you a little jittery. It may give you a withdrawal headache. Believe it or not, I don't know if anyone ever looks at the ingredients in their drugs. I do all the time. Every time I'm buying Tylenol, things like that, I'm looking at all the ingredients. And I've seen headache Tylenol, and it has acetaminophen and caffeine in it. And why is that? Because for many people, that's why they have a headache. It's caffeine withdrawal. But for most people, that is the worst of it. Other than maybe having to urinate a little more often, right? Because caffeine is a bit of a diuretic. So it may cause you to urinate quicker than you need to. For children, we're trying to avoid it. Their bodies are much smaller, particularly younger children should avoid coffee until they're at least, 12 is kind of usually the recommendation. They're going to get caffeine and other things. Caffeine is in other foods and whatnot. But their bodies are so much smaller, they absorb it so much quicker. And, there are some potential toxic effects, right, of things like heart palpitations and things like that. But generally for adults, it's not usually a big concern. There are, like I said, in high doses, and sometimes people take caffeine pills and things like that. You shouldn't be popping 10 of those, not good for your heart for sure. But generally, other than really high uses, caffeine is a pretty good deal in terms of drugs. Like think about the perks, right? Having a cup of coffee, a little more awake, ready to do a little bit more, alert and maybe a little more energetic, all those kind of things. It's the higher doses that we're more concerned about, and mostly for kids. I think I mentioned before, right? Having caffeine and breastfeeding can sometimes affect babies if people are having high doses and whatnot. And that's where some of the concerns are a little bit more. In terms of how much, I'm not sure. And I think I gave the recommendation 1 large cup of coffee a day is usually the recommendation for lactating mothers. Tobacco, we could go on and on about tobacco, and we have a little bit already. I'm not going to say too much more about it, other than what's there. Don't do it. Okay, I think that is it for topic 14. Okay, so topic 15 is really short, so we're definitely going to wrap this up today. But yeah. So, like I said, we just went through the whole life, right? Fetus to almost death, and lots of interesting challenges in there. And things to think about. And maybe I'll come back and talk about some of those things at the end here. I'm going to change which one I have going here. All right. Oops. All right, topic 15. Like I said, this is going to be super short. There's way too much we could talk about. You could do an entire course on this kind of thing, right? In terms of what is going on the globe. We could talk about just water issues for weeks, right? In terms of what is going on. So just want to touch on a few things with this topic here, right? In terms of hunger in Canada. There is hunger in Canada. we're in pretty good shape though. Overall, we have a lot of social programs. People are you know, compared to other places in the world, relatively wealthy. Most of us are not living on like $1 a day, which the poorest of the poor in the world are, and those kind of things. But there are some areas and some groups that are higher risk. You can see this is a graph talking about people living in food insecure households. And one of the biggest groups are basically single mothers and their families, right? So we're talking about somebody who may or may not be on one income and has a child, right? And that's the biggest area of food insecurity. There's other groups that are vulnerable. Indigenous populations in certain parts of the world, you know, there's higher food insecurity there. Some cities have more food insecurity with immigrant populations. Some it's the exact opposite. You know, some of these differences are regional and whatnot. But I'll show you some numbers here. Here's some prevalence of household food insecurity in Canada. So, you know, you're looking at, you know, some areas a little higher than others, Nunavut being the big one. I know Nunavut has been in the news for, I don't know, at least 5 years now. I keep seeing talks about stuff going on in Nunavut. And you can imagine, right? How are they getting food up there? That's a big deal, right? In the summertime, they bring things on ships. In the wintertime, everything is flown in, right? So there's lots of complaints about people living there and just trying to buy essentials, you know, milk and eggs or diapers for their babies and whatnot. And, you know, there's all sorts of photos on the internet and you know, of what's going on in the grocery stores with these things. And it's just like crazy to look at the prices people are paying to get the food they need. So you can imagine a place like Nunavut, never mind how many communities there. I don't know how much everyone knows about northern Canada. But there's so many communities in these extreme northern areas of Canada. It's like 100, 200 people. Only way to get there is by an ice road in the winter or fly in the summer, right? So you can imagine, you know, food insecurity can be a big deal depending on, you know, they're totally reliant on, you know, those few trips that go in and whatnot. My brother actually works in Northwest Territories. He works in Yellowknife. And when he goes to these remote communities, he always gets a big box of Tim Hortons donuts and a big box of fruit. And they love them. Like they just absolutely love them. They're like, you don't have no idea what this means, right? And for him, like it's, you know, he's spending like $30, right? And winning lifelong friends because of it. You know, those things are big deal, things you're not necessarily going to get. You can see here's from a University of Toronto study I was looking at just, and you know, they're looking at basically racial profile of where, you know, food insecurity is. And you can see I mentioned Indigenous populations in some parts of the world is a big place where that kind of thing happens. You're looking at more remote, sometimes communities and those kind of things. Sometimes it's economic as well. What was I going to say about this? You know, hunger and mental health, I guess, is something we can talk about. But so I want to talk a little bit about food banks. I was trying to dig in and find a lot of good information on food banks. And turns out there's too much information on food banks. So I just wanted to focus on one or two things here in terms of what is going on in food banks, right? The number one thing we can say is that food bank usage in the last 20 years is on a massive increase. And this is one of the things that food bank people are trying to understand, you know, why this is necessarily, and, you know, trying to understand who all the users are. So here's some stats, right? Food Banks Canada is kind of the national food bank kind of overhead organization. You can see that a third of the people that walk through the doors are children, probably accompanied by a parent, I'm imagining. And a bunch of those, almost half are single parent households, right? Many, of course, are on social assistance or, you know, unemployed. So 7 out of 10 are unemployed kind of thing. And so 2021, there were apparently 1.3 million visits to these food banks that were recorded. Why are people going, right? Here's from a survey: cost of food, benefits too low, cost of housing, lost job, lower delayed wages, not enough hours of work, cost of utilities. So again, most of it is economic to some degree, right? I guess we talked about this already. Here was the one thing I wanted to know about, right? What was happening with COVID and food bank usage, right? Many people suddenly found themselves unemployed. or their income changed. And, you know, if you lived in Fort McMurray, we also had a flood and our food bank had to shut down. So kind of some crazy things going on, right? And it's actually really interesting when you start to look into COVID and food banks, what was happening, because some food banks, their clientele went down massively. People were afraid to get out of their house. We're just fine. We're all just make do with what I have. In some areas, it went up massively, right? And as I mentioned, Indigenous populations were the ones that actually decreased their usage of food banks across Canada the most. Because if you may or may not recall, Indigenous people were the ones having more severe illness if you look at all the populations in Canada. And so there was certainly a lot greater fear. I remember in 2020, I did drive to Ontario that summer, and there's one place I pulled over. There was just something to see on the road, and a little playground or something. I can't remember what it was. And I'm looking, and down the road, like there's some trucks and a bunch of guys sitting there looking very serious. And anyway, one of them walks over to me, and I realized, okay, I realized they're all, you know, it's some Native community there. And he comes over and just a friendly guy talking to me, asking where we're from and all that. And just he was bored, and I was just asking about that. And they had their, it was a reservation for Indigenous people, and they had their road blocked off. They were not letting anybody in. And this was their COVID protocol, right? To not let anybody in. And so I was talking to him a little bit about that in terms of, you know, they were quite concerned, and at the moment they had 0 cases, and they wanted to keep it that way, right? And that was, I guess, their prerogative. So interesting stuff. Like I said, these are things I kind of find interesting. So this here's another chart. You can see 2019 to 2021, this steep increase, right? You can see a little bit of a dip, a dip there, but you know, for the most part, you've got that kind of trend in Canada. Top challenges, it's resources, right? Money, food, volunteers, those kind of things are the biggest resources, the biggest concerns, right? So what about world hunger? Canada is blue. That's pretty good. Like I said, you know, we're very, very fortunate to live in Canada. We have to endure our winters, but you know, I mean, in terms of where we are compared to many places of the world, we have food, we have water, we're a very healthy country. A lot of other places in the world are not necessarily so lucky. You can see some red places in the world. I think I have, let me just take a peek at the next slide here. This is 2020. These are some 2022 projections for food insecurity. You can see, for example, that top one is what? The Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. You know, around 25% of people have food insecurity in your country, right? And all sorts of various reasons, right? Congo has had all sorts of crazy things going on in terms of the last few years with civil war and Ebola. And I mean, you know, I don't know a lot about it, but you can imagine all those kind of things affect, you know, farming and just general life, right? So anyway, like I said, we could open a Pandora's box and talk about every single one of these countries and their issues in terms of what is going on. And we can't certainly do all that, but like I said, it is something that you know, a lot of people do spend their time thinking about in terms of the implications, right? We're talking about economic implications. We're talking about kids not going to school because they don't have food, they have to help on the farm, and that leads to an entire lack of development in some cases of countries, or education, or all of those kind of things. This is a little chart from the textbook, just talking about, you know, all these kind of things into one package about, and like I said, you could go into all of these social issues, and really, I feel like I can't do any of them justice without doing a whole course on them, right? So what are the big threats to world food, right? And it's all the usual things that you've probably heard about, things like access to water, having resources, those kind of things. A lot of it is environmental. And again, like all these things we could go into in different areas, and I can't really, you know, have a full discussion on all these things. But obviously, if there's threats to food, we're looking at threats to human populations in different parts of the world. So the textbook goes into quite a degree in terms of, you know, what can we do to improve this? And this is kind of those bigger questions, right? In terms of, you know, it's lovely to talk about being more sustainable. And I think that's what everybody on the planet wants to think towards. And hopefully we can do a better job at doing this. And this is where, you've got so many different people coming into this. You've got farmers, you've got governments, you've got trade agreements between countries, you've got laws, right, in terms of, banning things or moving towards sustainable practices. And there's concerns in many areas, right? If you look at California, they had a drought for, I don't know what it was, 14 years, right? How that's going to affect them in the future. California is a very agriculturally intense state, right? And they've sucked up all the groundwater. So what are they going to do now? All those pistachio farms are going to die, and we're going to pay more for pistachios. But I mean, think about all the other implications, right? Pistachios are certainly a luxury food, definitely. But now multiply this kind of thing in many places of the world, they're having these exact issues, right? And a place like California at least has the resources and the money to maybe do something about it and think long-term. A lot of places do not. All these kind of things are usually, the ideas around sustainable practices, using less resources, getting people to produce less waste, right? Another California thing, right? They have a law in California to reduce food waste, right? If you look at how much food waste goes into a landfill, half of the quantity in many places, right? So California is phasing it out, right? Making it illegal to throw your food waste out. And they've just started, like this week, I think they started, they have to reduce by 50% or something. So now they have statewide and citywide, composting programs, green bins and all these kind of things. And all of the challenges that go along with that, right? Getting people to take their stickers off their banana peels, right? Educating people on that. And they spent years sort of phasing this in and educating people and not throwing your Corona bottle up because there's a lime in it, right? Glass in compost is bad, right? Let's teach people about those kind of things. So you can imagine, like, this is a big thing. And of course, that's a huge resource. All those nutrients that we did not eat, right? We can make fertilizer in a place like California with all those farms. Yeah, why not do it, right? But moving people towards that and trying to get them, trying to get us to think differently about our food and our resources. This is, of course, I guess, been going on since the environmental movement started in the 1960s, right? And you've probably heard of a bunch of these things, before. And these are things to think about, right? If you take a look at here's a salad from this is from an image from the textbook, thinking about, where all of these ingredients in your salad came from, right? It's kind of incredible to think about it, right? I was actually reading up on strawberries, right? I love strawberries. Most of the strawberries we eat in Canada are from California. And so, looking into that kind of thing, the cheapest part of the strawberry production is the transport. It's kind of crazy to think about that. They're flying strawberries in from California so that I can eat them and get them on sale for $3.99 at Save-On. How can they do that, right? But that really is one of the smallest costs. But the amount of fuel that goes into that kind of thing, of course, is, we're talking all about climate change and CO2, emissions and those kind of things. And anyway, this is just kind of getting people to think about a little bit. Again, from the textbook, just a whole bunch of, ideas around, more sustainable living. And it can get really, really overwhelming, when you think about all the things that you could do. And then there's always the big question, if I recycle this one thing, is it going to make any difference whatsoever? Right? There's those type of mentalities and whatnot. And I'm kind of a big believer in, you don't have to do everything, but pick a few things, right? Particularly if they're easy. If I can walk to work today because the weather's nice, then why not, right? Why be lazy and take the car? It's going to be better for me. It's going to be better for the environment. If it's cold, I'm going to drive. I'm not going to feel guilty about it. But anyway, lots of ideas here about recycling, being more sustainable and things like that. And I'm not going to go into all of these things, but definitely, things to think about that might even save you money in the long run. And you buy a new house and you can, make a choice in terms of, your appliances, right? In terms of what is more energy efficient and what is not, and those kind of things. Or replace the old ones that are less energy efficient with more energy efficient ones. And these are, societal problems we're going to have to think about in the long run. And sometimes I wonder if the thing that's going to save us from automobiles is the gas prices, right? Anyway, just some thoughts on those kind of things. Something else to think about in terms of our food, how much resources go into our foods. If you look at meat, for example, how much water and grain and those kind of things go into feeding and watering a cow. It's ridiculous. There's a lot of charts like this. You can see this is showing how many kilograms of grain to feed one cow versus a chicken in terms of the amount of meat. Chickens are more efficient than cows. And also you can see on the left-hand side, water usage. So there's lots of people kind of looking at this kind of data. And the reality is, if everybody ate like Canadians on the planet, we wouldn't have enough meat, right? Canadians eat a lot more meat compared to a lot of developing countries. Meat is more expensive, and it tastes great. But something to think about if we want to have a sustainable planet. Eating less meat might be one of the ways to deal with it. Anyone realize that we might hit 8 billion this year? Yeah, we're at 7.9 billion people on the planet, right? We hit 7 billion, I think it was in 2012. So in 10 years, we've I'm like, whoa, that's crazy to think about that. How many people are on the planet? Come on, there we go. So, one of the recommendations, you want to be more sustainable, eat lower on the food chain, right? Don't eat the lions and tigers, they're high on the food chain, right? That's a joke. But anyway, apparently I did read an author who had eaten a lion burger once. It was, kind of interesting to even think about that concept, but eating plant-based diets, or at least lower on the food chain, is generally more sustainable. If you take a look at this, like I said, lots of stats on this in terms of the amount of resources that go into meat and those kind of things. And it's certainly something to think about. And so, the question is, should we all become vegetarians or vegans or whatnot? And this is actually the big argument from a lot of people who are proposing that more people need to move towards a vegetarian or vegan diet. And there's tons of authors who have books on these. This is a real famous one that influenced a lot of people many years ago, Diet for a Small Planet. And like I said, just doing the math and looking at what is sustainable and what is not, and those kind of things. This guy, the Omnivore's Dilemma, is a more recent proponent of it. Actually, he's got a lot of great YouTube videos and very, very reasonable guy, but kind of talking about that kind of concept, right? I think we talked about food waste already a little bit. I was going to look into this a bit more because I was curious about some of the statistics on food wastage in Canada and whatnot. And anyway, it's been making me think about. I've been thinking about composting for like a decade, right? So why am I taking so long to get around to it? I have no idea. So maybe this is the year. Hopefully, I can get into it. My brother is in Yellowknife and he composts, so it's colder there, so we can certainly do it here. So just some other thoughts in terms of, some choices, right? Depending on what your goals are. You can see here's some options, right? So for example, you want something that's nutritious and high quality, then you want fresh stuff, and locally and seasonally is kind of the best way to go with that. If you just want better nutritious at the best price, then you're looking at buying produce, and learning how to cook it, and you're looking at not processed stuff, maybe frozen vegetables and things like that. If you worry about working conditions of different places, in terms of laborers and fruit pickers and things like that, buy locally, or at least in places that have better laws around picking fruit and whatnot. It's actually just a very interesting thing to look into in terms of fruit picking, and how the laws are around different parts of the world. Much of our produce is picked by my migrant workers. They come to Canada for the months of the summer and they pick all the apples out of orchards. And in terms of what their rights are in different countries, actually is a very interesting kind of thing to look into. Conserve biodiversity, reduce your carbon footprint, those kind of things. Move towards more plant-based eating, right? Is kind of the general thing. Want to reduce pesticides, go organic, right? That's kind of some of the recommendations. Okay, so I told you it's going to be quick. That was topic 15. There's no quiz for topic 15. There'll be a couple questions on the final for it. Yeah, so that's kind of it, kind of. Want to spend a few minutes talking about the exam, as I said I would. And a couple other things just to finish up. So I gave you these tips right at the beginning, added one more. Okay, added one more, the last one. Make health, nutrition, a lifelong learning thing, right? That's one of the number one things you can do about, just about anything in life. Like I said, you're a parent, doesn't hurt once in a while to pick up a parenting magazine. You're a food eater, doesn't hurt once in a while to, read a nutrition blog, and get some ideas for, having a healthier lifestyle and improving, nutrition of yourself, or if you're feeding other people, all those kind of things are good, right? Then all these other things I mentioned before. I think we talked a little bit about cooking. You can see that note about cooking. Learning how to cook is a big deal, right? And I'm not talking about making craft dinner and following instructions on a process box, but learning how to put together your own meal. And as you do that, you're not just learning how to prepare those carrots, but you're thinking about the entire plate, right? Where you're putting together, okay, we want some vegetables, we want some protein, we want a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And learning how to cook is a big deal. And don't think you're going to do it overnight, right? I'm still learning how to cook. I'm still learning how to cook new things, right? We got one of those air fryer things a couple of years ago, and suddenly found out that all the things that everyone's telling me to cook in it, I can't do those things, right? I don't know why. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but you know what? I've discovered we can do asparagus in the air fryer, and it is amazing, right? Asparagus is an adult vegetable, and it's good, but in the air fryer, it's amazing, right? So, it's probably good for me to have more asparagus anyway. So learning how to cook is a good one in there as well. Something I meant to share with you way at the beginning, and this goes along with lifelong learning. Like I said, reading things. I'm huge into podcasts. I probably am subscribed to like 40 or 50 of them. Here's some that are related to nutrition that I really enjoy. Some of them are more focused on nutrition. Some are more, like science versus is a little bit of everything. But if you look up best nutrition podcasts, you're not going to see these ones on the list. You'll probably see sound bites on the list, but these are just some other ones that I really enjoy. Partly because they're science-based, right? I love science, but I also love learning about the body, and so a good variety of them there if you're interested in podcasts. And it's not so bad. I walk to work when I can. I listen to a podcast every morning, and I learn so much. Gives me ideas to look into for not just my classes, but things I want to read more on, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely encourage the lifelong learning thing. Okay, let's talk about that exam. Okay, it's on Tuesday, April 26th at 9 a.m. Okay, it's in Fieldhouse 4. So first question is, does anyone know where Fieldhouse 4 is? Okay, so I'm just going to go there right now, because good luck if you don't know where it is. Good luck finding it. Come early if you don't know where it is. Okay, I even made a map for you. Okay, so here's the map, right? You're going to go towards the library. You're going to keep on going. You're going to go past the you're not going to go towards King's Lounge or the Purple Palace. You're going to go around the other way, around IT, and it keeps on going that hallway, believe it or not. And it's all the way around the corner, and it's this place that everyone else on the planet calls the old gym, but the people at the registrar want to call it Fieldhouse 4. Right? So there used to be a gym there, and it was storage space for as long as I can remember. And then last year, they're like, we have all this space. We should fix it up and make it another gym. And so now I guess, yeah, some of the sports teams are practicing there and whatnot. And that's where we're putting our exams. So notice, arrive early is always good, right? Just in case you get lost, traffic, who knows what. The policy is if you are 15 minutes or more late, you will not be allowed in. Okay, so that's what the policy is. So you should make sure you're there on time and bring your photo ID. Okay, we will send around, do attendance list and get everyone's ID. In terms of this class, I know like 6 of your names. Everyone else, I don't know if you are who you say you are. And if I'm not there, right, I tell all my students, always bring your ID, even if I know who you are, because if I'm sick, I'm not going to be there and someone else will be taking your ID. Okay. Raise questions if you have, raise your hand if you have any questions. So this is 25% of your final grade. It's 2 hours long, and this is the plan for the exam. So I think the midterm was it 50 marks? Remember correctly, something like that. So this is the plan, is to be 80 marks. I might tweak that a little bit once I've actually written it. It could be set, 72 multiple choice, 8 short answer questions or something like that. Hopefully from the midterm, we got an idea what it's going to look like in terms of the short answer questions. And just a comment on that, okay? Be thorough. Okay, some people were not really giving me an answer, okay? Your job as a student is to convince me that you get it. Okay, so, you got to be thorough, give me examples, throw everything at me, right? If it's, and particularly if it's worth more, if it's a 1 mark question, right? 1 mark, right? Kind of like 1 to 2 sentences, right? Is what you're looking at, kind of depending on how wordy you are and all that kind of thing. Now, you don't have to be in full sentence form for final exam or anything like that. If it's 5 marks, right? Then multiply that. That's like minimum kind of 5 sentences, 5 thoughts kind of thing, right? So make sure that you do give me something that that convinces me that you got it. And examples are a really great way to do so. Other than this, I haven't really given the final exam too much thought. I had some questions about if everything's going to be on the exam. The answer is yes. It covers the whole course. The emphasis will probably be on everything after the midterm in terms of exactly what. So 70 marks multiple choice. We had 15 units, right? So probably 1 or 2 from all the units before, and then everything else from all the units after the midterm is probably what I'm looking at. There's some things that, have been kind of themes throughout the course, right? Talking about nutrient dense foods. You definitely expect a couple of questions about fiber, those kind of things on there. But I haven't really, like I said, unfortunately had a chance to give it much thought. I've been thinking a little bit more about marking your assignment, been thinking about it. Been pretty busy. I'm going to be looking at that next week. So I know there's been some questions about that as well. So hopefully before the exam, I will have all of your grades in except for the final exam. Again, it's just, this time of year, I've got how many assignments coming in, and, just trying to find time to sleep and eat is a priority too sometimes, right? Any questions about that? Yeah, so next week, we have 1 more class on Wednesday. I have no idea what we're going to do. Probably I'll talk a little about the exam. I'll send you an email on Tuesday and tell you what to expect, whether it's even worth it coming or not, because we're kind of done the material. But I'll probably have something to look at or discuss, but I have no idea what it's going to be yet. So I'll send them some further information on that next Tuesday once I have a chance to think about it. Any other questions, comments? I think that's all I have for you here. Oh, yes, the other thing. The multiple choice, true, false is going to be on bubble sheets. Okay, take a look at this. If you've never filled out a bubble sheet before, probably most of you will be fine. Okay, but in a class like this, my guess is 1 to 2 of you will totally mess this thing up. Okay, so I don't want you to be that person. Okay, it's not a huge headache, but once in a while, some people do some really weird things, like they don't know their student number and they don't fill in their name. That's bad. Okay, or they forgot to fill in a couple of questions. So make sure, you can see there's some notes here. You do fill out the answers on the exam sheet and the bubble sheet, just in case you miss, and then I can go in and check it. This system here, use a pen, make sure you write your name. You're going to put your student number, and you're going to take away all the zeros at the beginning. Okay, and then you're going to put your student number in. And then you just shade it in. And this is going to go through a scanner, and the scanner is going to kind of do the hard work for me. Then when you answer your questions, I just see there's a question down here. I'll get you in a second. Study guide, yeah, we'll get to that in a second. So when you answer your questions, you fill in the one corresponding to the correct answer. Okay, hopefully everyone knows that. If you make a mistake, you can just cross it out. Okay, that's not a problem. So what happens is anytime there's a weird anomaly like this, the system flags it and I get to review it. And then, if it's obvious what your answer is, then it's fine. If you've made a real mess of this, then write the answer over here on the side, A or B or whatever, and I'll see it when the system reviews it. Okay, but hopefully that's straightforward. Like I said, there's always 1 or 2 people that do really weird things. Like I had somebody whose student number apparently last semester was 0000000. Right? I have no idea what people are thinking of these kind of things. But your name is there and your student number is there, and your answers are mostly in good shape, I'll be very happy with you. Okay. Somebody asked about a study guide. Yeah, I'm planning to put together a study guide. So that's probably what my job will be on Tuesday. Anyway, so yeah, also no more questions. I guess that's it for today. So thanks for coming out. Thanks for taking the class. I'm sure I'll see everybody around somewhere, whether it's the grocery store or the hallways or whatever. And best of luck with your studies, your exams, and all those kind of things.